So thank you again for coming and spending the evening with us. We know your time is precious, and we will work very hard to stick to our hour time limit. So we're going to have Dr. Blight speak, and then we'll also have some room for questions and answers, which we will use the chat box to do. So again, we hope you find some spiritual nourishment and encouragement along the way. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And before we get started, as we get started here, let me just get this going over here. I'd like us to begin with a prayer. So we'll begin with our opening prayer and just ask kind of to take a deep breath, me too, and relax and let the presence of the Lord fill you as we kind of let our worries and our concerns from the day go by. And just go ahead and ask the Holy Spirit to come into our day here and our time here. Dear Lord, I come to you tonight, placing myself in a position to receive. Open my ears and my heart to what you want me to say. Let me hear your voice. Be with me, Lord, as I am caregiving. I know that I was called by you into my role as caregiver, and my vocation is sacred, and I thank you. But sometimes, Lord, it can seem more than I can bear. So I hold you to your promise, Lord, that you will sustain me and my loved one. I hold on to the assurance that you too are in this mess that I call caregiving. Fill my days, Lord, with your love, your hope, your peace. When I went astray, gently call me back to you. For it is in your arms that I find peace, comfort, strength, and assurance. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So I would like to begin by introducing Dr. Aaron Blight. Dr. Blight is the author of the newly released book, When Caregiving Calls. When Caregiving Calls, Guidance as You Care for a Parent, Spouse, and Aging Relative. It was recently recognized as the winner of the 2020 Best Indie Book Awards, nonfiction caregiving category. So congratulations on that, Dr. Blight. He speaks regularly on caregiving and is the founder of Caregiving Kinetics, a firm dedicated to those who care for the aging population. He has served as a family caregiver, home care company owner, caregiving scholar, and leader at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So he has a diverse career history, but all surrounding caregivers. So welcome, Aaron. We're glad you're here with us today.
Thank you, Kelly. I am delighted to be with you tonight. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm so excited to be with you tonight. I've been looking forward to this, and I just want to share a thought here as we get started. As Kelly said, I owned a home care company, and very early in my days of owning my home care company, I am a Christian and very comfortable in the presence of other Christians. And so one night, very early owning my home care company, I was reading in the Bible, and I came across this verse, John 21:18. And this is Jesus speaking, and he says, "Verily, verily, I say unto thee, when thou wast young, thou girdest thyself and walkest whither thou wouldest. But when thou shalt be old, thou shalt stretch forth thy hands, and another shall gird thee and carry thee whither thou wouldest not." And I thought, wow, that's caregiving right there. Jesus is talking about caregiving. And so I took that verse and went to a graphic designer and had it blown up on this beautiful picture, and we placed it in both of our home care company offices. And I just wanted to share that with you. It's not one of my normal things in presentations, but I know that you guys would appreciate that verse, and particularly the voice, the person that expressed these sentiments about caregiving, from he who really is the master caregiver, right? Our exemplar, the Lord Jesus Christ. And so I'm delighted to be here with you tonight to talk about caregiving. And I'm pushing the button. I appreciate very much Kelly's prayer and the words that she said about what we hear, but also what we feel in our heart. And so you're going to hear some things tonight, but I would invite you to pay particular attention to the thoughts that enter your mind and the feelings of your heart. And we're going to take a few minutes and I'm going to ask you some questions about that. We'll stop along the way and we'll be using the chat feature for that. This is my social media, and if you are so inclined and would like to reach out to me on social media, that's where you can do it. And I would love to hear your thoughts after tonight's presentation. And it seems like there's a little bit of a lag, Kelly, when I'm doing this. So
Yes, sorry, I don't know how to speed that up. I would also just, if everybody is not muted, could you please be sure and mute yourself too? So if you're not muted, please do so. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. You know, I think it might be when people are entering and it's pauses or something. But anyway, we're going to talk about a framework for caregiving. And if you think about the idea of framing can be a physical thing, like in a house. And all houses have frames. This is a scene that's going on down the street from me right now. There's a new development going in, and I'm seeing images like this all over the place. And a frame keeps the whole structure up, right? But when you're inside of the house, you really don't think about the frame. You go about doing your daily activities in your home, and the frame is just there, but you're focused on what you need to do. The frame is an integral part of the whole structure, but you don't really think about it. So framing can be physical, but it also can be a way to think about something that's abstract. And so today, we're going to talk about the framework of caregiving, some things maybe that we don't necessarily see, but we sense. And I hope that in this conversation, it'll help you to perceive a little bit more of what's going on in your caregiving experience and help you to think more deeply about it. A little bit about me real quick. As Kelly said, I used to be at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services a long time ago, it seems like now. My mother-in-law was diagnosed with a brain tumor very unexpectedly at a young age. And we were her family caregivers for 5.5 years as she battled cancer. She lived with us for a couple of those years, and it had a dramatic impact on our family. We were relatively young at the time for this to happen. And so for the rest of my career, really, I've spent focused on caregivers and the need to support not only the individuals that have chronic conditions and diseases and old age conditions, things like that, but also support caregivers. I became the owner of a home care company, Home Instead Senior Care, and then went back to school and got my doctoral degree. And I'm not a medical doctor. My doctoral degree is in learning and in education. And I studied caregiving as a phenomenon of social science and how we as caregivers come to perceive who we are in the world because of our caregiving experience in our relationship. And we're going to share a little bit of that with you tonight. I sold my home care company a few years ago and started Caregiving Kinetics, and I've been out speaking to caregivers since then. I also teach a couple classes at Shenandoah University. As Kelly said, I just published a book and it just got an award, so I'm super excited about that. And Bob Mastrogiovanni, the president of Well Spouse Association, said this about the book. He said, "No family caregiver should be without this book. In clear and concise chapters, it covers all the topics caregivers need to understand the journey they are on and provides a reference source to be revisited again and again." If you're a spousal caregiver, Well Spouse Association is something to check out. They offer caregiver support groups for spouses. Just want to give you a couple of quick facts about caregiving before we get into our discussion. In a recent report from the AARP and the National Alliance for Caregiving, this came out in May of last year, the estimated 53 million Americans have been involved in some kind of informal, unpaid family caregiving during the last year. That's more than 1 in 5 adults. I've also seen studies about the estimated economic impact of family caregiving. This chart is from 2013. These numbers have grown, but the point of sharing this is that the value, the estimated economic value of unpaid family caregiving exceeds the estimated economic impact of the entire long-term care industry combined. That's striking, but that is the importance of unpaid family caregivers in our long-term care delivery system. Even with that, family caregivers are often overlooked. The World Health Organization said caregiving should also be a concern for communities, governments, and society as a whole. The role of family caregivers is often neither supported nor properly acknowledged. So that's why I'm here with you tonight, because I know how important the family caregiver role is. I've been one myself. I've worked with so many family caregivers, and I've seen how they often don't get the support that they need or the acknowledgement that they need. And my goal is to change that. So when we talk about framing the caregiving experience, we're going to talk about words that begin with the letter R. And we're going to use R words to form our framework for caregiving. And it's a little bit gimmicky to use R words. I am in complete agreement, but the purpose of the gimmick is to help people remember. If you just walk away tonight and you remember these R words, and then you think about your own caregiving experience in relation to these R words, then to me, that's a success. So the first R word that we're going to talk about is roles. When we think about roles, another way to think about them is the hats that we wear in the social world. We all have multiple hats that we wear. So for example, for me, I have one hat where I am a Christian, and I have another hat that I'm a business owner, and another hat as a father, and another hat as an American. And, I could pile all of these hats on top of my head, and they're all different roles that I encumber in the social world. And we have these hats that we can currently wear, and they're very important. They give us a sense of who we are, a sense of identity in society. Well, caregiver is another hat that you can wear. Caregiver is a role that we play in the social world. And to think about this, I like to use the metaphor of a play or a film. This is borrowed from the work of sociologist Irv Goffman. He likened the roles that we play to what we do in a dramaturgical production. So if caregiving was a play, the lead actor would be the care receiver. The spotlight is on the care receiver. The care receiver is the first person to step out on the stage. The script of this play is actually written by the conditions, the changing conditions of the care receiver. The caregiver is a supporting actor. The caregiver is never the star of the show. The role of the caregiver is simply to advance the storyline of the care receiver. But and the stage is usually the home, or if they are in a facility, the facility. But here's the thing about this play. Neither the caregiver or the care receiver auditioned for this role. They did not rehearse to get on that stage. They didn't ask to have the spotlight on them. In fact, the care receiver would be just as happy to be off of that stage with no spotlight. They don't have any practice, no rehearsal. They're just thrust onto the stage because of the health conditions of the care receiver. So that makes the role of caregiver and care receiver, I think, pretty unique, and it has a lot of implications. So I'd like to ask you here, and you can answer this in the chat. And Kelly's going to read some of your responses. But if your caregiving situation was a play, what would be the title of your caregiving script? And if you want to answer this, how would you describe your role? So I'm going to just give, I'm going to give you a quick minute to answer that on the chat. And if Kelly, if you see it on the chat, if you could respond, just read what the answers are.
Yep, I'll throw it out as people are throwing things in. So what would be the title of your caregiving script? Wonder if I'm not seeing the chat well, because I can't believe you guys are all so quiet. Baby of the family takes control, says Elizabeth. Surprise, you're it, says Maureen. How did we get here, said Jennifer. I guess she said it as an exclamation. I asked it as a question. How did we get here, says Jennifer. Surprise, never saw this coming, says Phyllis. Title, God help me. Kathleen, where is everybody? I think we have some very interesting thoughts in that. Yep. Kathy says, honoring mom of 5 crazy different daughters. The aspect of that one.
So, you know, every single title that was read there. Oh, keep going.
Unplanned roles. You're the nurse. I'm not the firstborn. Yeah.
You know, I love asking that question. And I bet that every caregiver who's on here could hear the title of somebody else's caregiving script and say, yeah, I get it. I can relate. In so few words, you can represent so much of what you're going through in your caregiving journey. I see Gloria says greatest blessing.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about that in a little bit, Gloria. So the first R is roles. Let's go to the second R word, which is relationships. So if you think about human relationships, every human relationship is unique. It's comprised of, you know, one individual person who comes to the relationship with their background, their experience, their knowledge, their personality, their interests, coupled with another person who has all of those same things. And 2 individuals start to interact together. And as they interact together, this relationship emerges. And it's a representation of the 2 of them together and how they interrelate with one another. And, you know, your relationship with your boss is going to be very different than your relationship with your buddy, right? In family relationships, if you think about your mom, your mother has a singular place in your life. Your relationship with your mother is unique, and she raised you. She wiped away your tears. She taught you so many things, and she loved you from the time that you were little. Hopefully that's the case. But if the mother who raised you starts to need care from you, things are going to be different. The way that you interact with your mom will be different. The things that you say to your mom will be different. The things that you think about your mom will be different. And likewise, on her end, she'll be thinking some different things about you. She'll be saying some different things to you. And so because of this new introduction of caregiving into the relationship, the dynamics of that relationship are changing. And so this is something that I had a very hard time with in my caregiving experience with my mother-in-law. I wasn't prepared for the changes that were going to happen in our relationship with my mother-in-law. And I'm going to introduce to you something called family caregiver identity theory. And it's something that I discovered in my doctoral dissertation research. It came from Rhonda Montgomery and Carl Kozlowski, who are applied gerontologists. And I had the chance to work with Rhonda Montgomery for a few years, and she reviewed my book, and this is what she said about the book. So I just wanted to share that with you. But Montgomery and Kozlowski view family caregiving as a series of role-based transitions that are precipitated by the changing health conditions of the care receiver. Now, to describe family caregiver identity theory, Montgomery and Kozlowski actually use a series of pie charts. And the pie charts represent who you are in the relationship with your loved one. So in this example, we're going to talk about a wife. Let's say it's a wife who's taking care of her husband. And the wife-husband relationship has been a singular relationship for her entire marriage, right? Being a wife has a lot of meaning and a lot of implications about your actions and your interactions with your husband. And so family caregiver identity theory views a series of phases across the caregiving trajectory where the role in the relationship changes because of the husband's challenges with health. It begins with phase one, where the wife may not even realize that she's starting to be a caregiver. She may not even look at it that way. But the pie chart you can see is about 10% caregiver. So the wife starts to do a few caregiving related things, and she may not even dawn on her that things are changing. But phase two comes when the wife starts to see more caregiver and less wife. She now starts to realize that, oh, things are different in my relationship. And so, I'm starting to do a little bit of caregiving, and I've never done this before for my husband. In phase three, the spousal role comes to be about equal with the caregiver role. And now often this is the point when family caregivers start to have an identity conflict. They start to ask themselves, well, who am I in this relationship? And who do I want to be in this relationship? And phase four comes when caregiving starts to really dominate the nature of the relationship with your loved one. In this example here in phase four, the wife is really much less of a wife and much more of a caregiver. Now, the role identity conflict emerges not simply based on the introduction of caregiving tasks, but rather how the family member feels about doing those caregiving tasks. So if you think, I have a rubber band here, okay? And if you think about this thumb here is what you're doing in the relationship right now. And then this thumb here is how you feel about it. This is how you feel about what you're doing, and this is what you're actually doing. Or I'm sorry, this is what you think you should be doing, okay? So the further away what you are doing from what you think you should be doing, the greater distance you see, the greater disconnect between there, you'll see more and more tension. So the greater the difference between what you're doing and what you think you should be doing, the more likely it is that you're feeling a role identity conflict in this relationship due to caregiving. So family caregivers have to reconcile that. They can reconcile that by redefining the terms of their relationship with their loved one. By either saying, basically, you know what, I'm not a wife anymore. I'm a caregiver now, and that's okay. That's okay. I'm getting back to this. I don't have that tension anymore. Or they might say, you know what, being a wife to a husband that has this particular illness encompasses caregiving. That's part of the definition of wife. I'm redefining what my wife role is in the relationship, and I'm okay with that. Some people can never really reach that kind of reconciliation of a role identity conflict. So the way that they deal with it is they cast off many of the tasks of caregiving that are causing them the role identity conflict. And that results in kind of a rebalancing of the caregiver role to the family role back to about phase two. There's no right or wrong answer here. My point is that this is the transition that family caregivers have to make through the trajectory of caregiving in order to make it through the long haul. And it's a lot easier said than done. It sounds very theoretical right now. It can be one of the hardest things that you have to do in your life. So let me pause for a minute and ask you, what is the impact of the caregiver role on your relationship?
So again, asking people to put that in the chat. So what is the impact of your caregiving role on your relationships? And if you can just kind of throw a couple of thoughts into the chat. See, Dr. Blight's, you can tell his teaching's coming out because he's just going to wait. Going to wait till we get some people raising their hands. Elizabeth, thank you, commented the idea of role reversal. Maureen said it changed both family and job relationships. So you had talked about those relationships and the different hats and changed many of them. And then Gloria commented how the relationship has changed in that she has a much closer relationship with her mom in her caregiving. And Kathleen said it caused great tension as our roles are changing and strains the relationship as roles are redefined. Balancing parenting, spousal relationship, wife duties while taking care of mother-in-law. How do we do it all without help from siblings during COVID? Was Jennifer's kind of comment, and we'll come back to the question part of that.
Well, the answer to that, Jennifer, is it's okay to get help.
Mm-hmm.
And you definitely should enlist the support of and the help of other family members. And we are going to talk about that here in a minute. Let's go to the next R word, speaking of, in the interest of time. So we've got roles, relationships. The third R word is realities. And let's be honest here about caregiving. The caregiving roles are not sexy. Okay, who wants to be a care receiver? I mean, you think about what a sexy role is, you know, actress or actor or movie star, right? That's not what this is about. Okay, this is about vomit and puke and pee and poop and all of that stuff that you have to do as a caregiver. It's not sexy. I like to share with you just a thought here from Superman. Very, you know, this individual here represents in many ways the ultimate human physicality, right? He is Superman. He can do anything, and he saves the world, and he has just incredible prowess and strength and capability, and he's handsome, and you know, look at all these wonderful things that Superman can do. And we know that the man who played Superman, Christopher Reeve, on Memorial Day 1995 had a tragic accident, fell off a horse, and became paralyzed from the neck down. It was shocking to see Superman like this in a wheelchair. And he wrote a memoir called Still Me. And in that memoir, he said this about his transition to being a quadriplegic. People often ask me what it's like to have sustained a spinal cord injury and be confined to a wheelchair. Apart from all the medical complications, I would say the worst part of it is leaving the physical world, having to make the transition from participant to observer long before I would have expected. I like how Christopher Reeve describes his transition from participant to observer in the physical world as that being a summation of his experience and the hardest thing for him to do. And if you think about your care receiver, whatever, unless they were born with a birth defect or a major disability, most people who are receiving end-of-life care or care for conditions that they receive when they're older, they were Superman before.
Hi.
They took their body for granted.
Hello.
And you know,
Hello,
somebody's
Whoops, let me see if I can.
So they were Superman before and didn't even think about how their body enabled them to do so many things, to be an active participant in their life. And now the reality is, because of the changing health conditions that they're experiencing, they have to transition to observer in their own life. And that can be a very hard reality for people to accept. Another thing that I think is a hard reality of caregiving, oops. is that as caregivers, we have to confront, and as care receivers, we have to confront marginalizing cultural assumptions about the human body. You know, our society tells us that we're supposed to look like that, right there. We're supposed to look like that. We're supposed to do that, be able to move like that. I don't know about you. I don't look like that. I can't do that. Most care receivers can't do that. And so the decline in the functioning of the body is very hard. And in addition to that, our culture teaches us that there are certain things about the human body that are taboo. Things like adult incontinence. Like, we're not supposed to talk about that. There are all of these body parts that fail: the eyes, the ears, the hip, the heart, the lungs, the knees. I mean, all these body parts fail. We talk about all the body parts that fail except for two: the bladder and the bowel. We don't talk about those two things. But guess what? Those two parts of the body, they also fail. And we should not allow our care receivers to feel less than human because their bladder fails. It's a source of embarrassment, of stigmatization for the care receivers. And as caregivers, we have to help our as caregivers, we have to help our care receivers maintain their human dignity and self-respect, and not let harmful, false cultural assumptions affect their sense of identity. Caregiving is hard, not just physically, but also emotionally. And we have the physical tasks of caregiving, right? All of the moving that we have to do, picking up people that can't bear their own weight. There's a reason that caregivers have back injuries a lot. But then emotionally, the reality is the caregiving role takes an emotional toll. Have you ever heard of emotional labor? There's actually research on this. Emotional labor is what happens when you have to regulate your emotions, so that whatever you're feeling inside, you just keep it inside for the sake of someone else. You might want to scream. You might want to cry. You might be pulling your hair out in absolute frustration, but you just play it cool. You regulate your emotion because you don't want to upset your care receiver, who is having a hard enough time as it is. There was a study of hospice nurses, and they found that the hospice nurses had a different persona front stage versus backstage. When the hospice nurses were on stage in front of patients and their families, they presented in a very competent, kind, compassionate, professional manner. But then when they were away from the patients and their families, and they were maybe amongst themselves in the break room, they were much more calloused, even cracking jokes. Some maybe even kind of like, ooh, a hospice joke? You crack a joke in hospice? Mm-hmm. But that type of behavior represents their coping mechanism. That's the way that they would deal with so much of the hard realities of being around patients who were dying all of the time. So again, that analogy of the metaphor of being in a play, regulating your emotions, presenting in a certain way to the care receiver, when inside you're feeling something completely different. Let's talk again about the reality of caregiving in 2020 and even 2021 now, with a report came out from the Rosalind Carter Caregiving Institute that said 83% of caregivers are reporting more stress now. Why is that? It's because of COVID, all of the social isolation. You have less respite care. You've got to worry about infection. You don't want to have people come into your home. You don't necessarily want to go out to bring stuff into your home for your loved one. And so it's just a very, very difficult time. So, question for you. What are the toughest realities that you face in caring today? Oops. I don't know why I keep doing that. It goes up, it goes one more than I. There we go. So what are the toughest realities that you are facing in caregiving?
And again, you can put this into the chat box and we'll read a couple of them out. What are the toughest realities you face in caregiving today? I would say I certainly heard some of that or have seen that idea of emotional regulation. That would be what I would type in, is that idea of emotional regulation. Phyllis commented that my mother-in-law's anger at being frustrated is coming to the front. Noreen commented how difficult it is to find qualified help. All very real concerns. Trying to balance it all, said Jennifer, and the reality of family dynamics and the current progression of her loved one, his loved one, said Carlos. Maureen said, looking ahead to terminal care for my sister. So again, all of those are real challenges people are facing. Realizing mom's dementia is continuing to get worse. More patience. Kathleen said COVID fears, respecting my mother's independence while also trying to meet her needs, kind of finding that balance.
You know, if we had a little more time and if we were in an in-person session, we would unpack some of those comments, right? And really get into a deeper discussion. But I bet that every caregiver on here could relate to what was said.
Yeah.
And thank you for sharing that. The point is, caregiving is hard. And you have to deal with these realities. You really don't have a choice. You may want to sort of sweep it under the rug or ignore it, avoid it, but you can only do that for so long. Eventually, you're going to have to face it head on. But let me just ask you this important question. Can you use a little help? Just from some of those answers to the question, I'm guessing maybe. So I'd like to just suggest that it's okay for you to be the star of the show once in a while. What do I mean by that? You know, sometimes caregivers become care receivers too. Self-care is extremely important in caregiving. And who helps caregivers? These are all people who help caregivers. And you guys have Kelly and Deborah. You got this wonderful book and this support group. And what a blessing that is for you, I'm sure, to be able to engage regularly with this community to receive support. But do not ignore your own needs. You need to take care of yourself. You need to fill your tank. And by so doing, you'll have the strength for the long haul. We don't have a lot of time, but I just want to make one point here. If you haven't read this book, Atul Gawande's Being Mortal, I would highly recommend it. This is something that he said in the book. And the essence of it is that we outsource so much of the decision-making about our lives at the end of life stage to medical professionals who are technically medically competent, but who do nothing for the sustenance of the soul. And you know, I think that everybody on this call understands that there is more to life than medical treatments, and that we as caregivers should be interested in the sustenance of the soul, in helping people to live the best possible life that they can live with the days that they have remaining, regardless of the health condition that they have. And so that may or may not mean going in and out of the hospital with endless medical procedures. And Atul Gawande in his book really kind of raises some moral questions about the way that we approach end-of-life care in America today. That's one of the realities of caregiving. Let's go to the fourth R, which is rewards. Claire Stacy is a sociologist at Kent State University. And she said that this book, When Caregiving Calls, considers aspects often overlooked, such as the rewards that come from caring. And someone earlier in this call mentioned the title of her script was Blessings, right? So there are a lot of rewards that come from caregiving. I was with a 101-year-old care receiver playing bingo, and he was close. When he was close, but he didn't win the bingo. And I said, "Oh, Mr. Mitchell, you were close." And he said, "Close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades." And that was a little nugget, just a little thing that I got from Mr. Mitchell that I have always remembered. Close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. And for me, that was just a little reward that I wasn't expecting at the time in caregiving. This is a painting of a woman that we cared for. Her name was Esther Doval, And she painted this at age 95 years old. And she had the dexterity and the ability to paint that picture. And I bought it from her and hung it in my office, because think of what she is teaching us. A 95-year-old with arthritis and other health conditions, she needs a caregiver, and yet she still has the capability of producing something that beautiful for the world. What a reward that is. Caregivers report a lot of very profound rewards associated from their caregiving experience. You get to learn from the care receiver. As a family caregiver, you get to make sure that your loved one receives the best possible care because you're the one providing it. You have a greater purpose and meaning in life. Caregiving makes you a better human being, more compassionate, more loving, more empathetic. Caregiving can enhance your relationships. One of the caregivers earlier said it's been the best relationship with her mom in their lifetime now during this period of caregiving. Maybe not an expected outcome, an expected reward, but that's what's happening. So I would ask you again, what are some of the rewards that you have found in caregiving?
So again, use your chat and drop in some of the rewards that you have seen and found and experienced in your caregiving. I think it was Gloria who had mentioned the idea of blessings and unexpected blessings. Being able to thank my mother for all she did to help me and now helping her with her needs. Jennifer said, time to sit and talk about interesting things from their lives and think about ways to bust the boredom of caregiving or of quarantine. Maureen talked about perspective. Noreen said increase patience and compassion. Lori said learning to love my husband just as Jesus does.
Thank you.
Finding those special moments such as, learning how to crochet or giving mom some purpose when she feels useless. Carlos talked about the random thank yous, the artwork that's being created. He has art in his family too, the smiles and laughter that we share, the stories that come out of time being spent together.
So many rewards, and my guess is most of those were not expected.
Mm-hmm. So
all of these things that we've talked about, roles, relationships, realities, and rewards, these are all social dynamics of caregiving. They're all the way that caregiving occurs within a social context. And there is so much focus on the physical tasks of caregiving that we fail to really consider what's happening to us socially. The reason that I emphasize the social aspects of caregiving is because when you are able to think about caregiving this way, it allows you to develop the ability to continue, to find it within yourself, to continue in the caregiving role over the long haul. You don't get overwhelmed. The tasks of caregiving can be learned, and we're going to talk about that here, because when I was sort of developing this model, I said, well, great, it's great to know about the social dynamics of caregiving, but what about the physical requirements of caregiving? Because that's what it's all about, is the physical, right? Doing the stuff that you have to do. So I thought, well, can we come up with an R word for the physical tasks of caregiving? It's got to be an R word, right? I thought about it and I came up with this word, readiness. Readiness encompasses your ability to do what needs to be done for your loved one when it needs to be done. You're ready to deliver on the tasks of caregiving. How do you develop readiness? Because again, nobody taught you how to be a caregiver, right? You didn't audition for the role. You didn't go to medical school, or you didn't get all this training. Even among the medical providers, often they are overwhelmed with family caregiving. Well, there was a study in an assisted living facility, a dementia care unit, of untrained caregivers who were working in the dementia care unit. They never received any kind of formal training on dementia care, but they developed their own way of managing the dementia-related behaviors in their environment by a process of showing, guessing, and trying. That's how you develop readiness in caregiving: showing, guessing, and trying. In other words, it is simply trial and error. It's practice. Nobody has taught you how to, move your loved one from the bed to the bedside commode, getting in and out of the car, how to manage the 12 daily medications. I mean, all of this stuff is learning on the fly. But it's only through the repetitive practice that you become ready to meet your loved one's needs now and in the future. So the question that I would ask here is, what is a caregiving task which, thanks only to practice, you're now ready to do? Something that you never really had done before, maybe something that was overwhelming to you early on, and now you're like, okay, I got this. I can do it because I've done it so many times in the past with my loved one.
So if you can write that in the chat box, what's something that you're now ready to do? I'll jump in while we're waiting on that. I don't know. I don't wear contacts or anything like that. So anything with the eye just sort of makes me a little squirmy. And Bobby, my son, has one of his eyes sutured and has to have drops in his eyes. I am a whiz at eyes now. That doesn't bother me at all. So
That's
I'm
a perfect
ready to do
example.
eyes. Noreen commented, reading nonverbal cues. So that's a big one. Handling all the doctor's appointments, being organized and handling all the doctor's appointments, said Elizabeth. Being proactive, says Carlos, in daily activities. Yeah, trying to anticipate and stay one step ahead. Karen said giving a shower to a spouse and the extra duties that come with caregiving.
I'm sure that every caregiver on this call has things
Mm-hmm.
they could recognize.
Being a better listener, says Gloria.
So thank you for sharing that. So when we add the readiness to our frame and we put all of these together, understanding the roles, honoring the relationships, confronting the realities of caregiving, cultivating the rewards of caregiving, and practicing for readiness of caregiving, you can see how this structure now comes into play and how this is how you can develop as a caregiver. And I think that when we put all of these R words together and look at the framework of caregiving, what we're really talking about is resilience. Caregivers who approach the caregiver role this way are resilient caregivers. It doesn't mean that their conditions are going to change. It doesn't mean that their loved one is going to get better. What it means is that despite the adverse circumstances of their lives, they can carry on and they can deal with the hard things. They can find the good things. They can help their care receiver to maintain dignity, and they can grow in their capacity to give the care that is necessary. So all of these are words: roles, relationships, realities, rewards, and readiness lead to resilience for caregivers. Now, I didn't know any of this stuff when I was a caregiver for my mother-in-law. I was completely overwhelmed. But that's why I'm here today. I don't have another chance to be a caregiver for her. She's dead. But I hope that this has helped you to think a little bit more deeply about your caregiving experience. And the book was selected as an editor's pick by Book Life Reviews. If you're curious about it, it has 18 chapters. These are the titles of the chapters. And I know Kelly's got it. I want to say thank you for what you do, because you make a difference every single day. And with that, I think we have some time for questions.
Absolutely. So if anyone has any questions, please go ahead and drop them into the chat box. One of the questions that came earlier is, what is the name, Aaron, of the book, Being Mortal, and the author?
The author is Atul, A-T-U-L, A-T-U-L, and his last name is Gawande, G as in George, A-W-A-N-D-E.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. There we go. Thank you,
There you go.
Carlos, for typing that. Anybody? I really appreciated really that idea that you were, and it kind of came back towards the end to that idea of the rubber band. And, you know, as you can kind of hold those to your expectations and the reality a little bit closer, that lessens the tension, and how, you know, that's where we begin to come off of kind of creating that tension in what our perception of caregiving is and what the reality is. And I really appreciated that and thought that it kind of even came into play at the end there too.
Yeah, definitely. I
Yeah.
can't take credit for that analogy. That I got that from Rhonda Montgomery.
Thanks, Rhonda. That was a good one. Yeah. So I just thought that was really helpful. Just a good way to think about it in terms of, there is a way for you to control that tension a little bit. And then but I did like too, you turned around and talked about that, you know, how we reconcile that.
Right.
Yeah. That was helpful. Okay. So we're getting close to the top of the hour. So Aaron, thank you so much. Thank you for going through that. And I love just the way in which you recognize the physical aspects of our caregiving, but really, as we dove deep today into that social emotional, is so important. And I love your R words, and your framing it too is really so critical for all of us. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you for having me.
A couple of thank yous are coming into the chat box as well. So it was excellent and very helpful. So I just want to let people know that we're going to continue to be offering the Caregiving Wisdom series, and let people know that there are also resources available on Nourish for Caregivers website. And I would encourage, we've had a couple of books thrown out here today. So absolutely take a look at, if you really want to continue along this theme of social emotional, take a look at Dr. Blight's book, and he really goes into it very carefully. And I love in your book, Aaron, the way in which you also encourage people, just like you did today, to stop and pause and reflect on things, that it's not just something you want to plow through, that you really want to take some time to go ahead and reflect on each of those, like you did with the questions in our chat today. So I thought that was a neat way. Absolutely. So thank you. And that was just a great evening. I have a question that came in. I know a family where their father was diagnosed with cancer and the son decided to be the caregiver, but as the father is not yet ready to give up his independence, everything backfired. And is there any advice kind of when to step in?
Yeah, you know, when caregiving calls, I have a whole chapter that's devoted to independence. And that can be a source of tension, right? Because you want to balance giving your loved one the independence that they deserve, but the help that they require. And in this case, you know, it sounds like the father isn't quite ready to accept the help that the son is offering. And so often I think the best way to approach something like this is for the son to try to have a talk with his dad and express how much he loves his dad, how much he wants to be there for his dad, and how he doesn't want to overrun his dad or to control his dad. But at the same time, he wants to be there. So he can ask his dad, how can I be there for you? when do you want me to be there for you? And the son should also be willing to hear what the dad has to say about that. And if dad's not quite ready, if dad's ornery and persnickety and stubborn, okay. Dad is an independent adult, and dad has the ability to self-direct his own life, right? And so you have to sort of be careful with that. You don't want to come in and try to just tell dad everything that that he needs done, because dad might just flat out reject that. He may not be very receptive. And so sometimes I think adult children, and this is where the historic family relationship comes in. Adult children are still in that parent-child relationship. That historic parent-child relationship comes to bear. And sometimes the parents, elderly parents, don't want to hear it from their children, but they might be willing to listen to a doctor.
Mhm.
So that's another route to take, where, maybe the son could engage his father's doctor and ask the doctor to talk with dad about his functional abilities. And the dad might listen a little bit more to the doctor than the son.
Especially, like you said, when safety issues come into play. Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So if any questions come in, we can take them, but we are up at the top of the hour. So again, I would just like to thank Dr. Blight for spending his time with us. And there were many, many thank yous in the chat box. So I will pass those on to you too.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you, everybody. It's been a pleasure.
Thank
being
you
with
so
tonight.
much. And thank you everyone for spending your evening with us tonight.